Hey guys, so this is the first part of your real multiple choice test. This was the 2017 multiple choice test that was given last year. So let's look at the first couple questions. When we are looking at question 1 through 3, before we even get to the questions, even just a quick skim, we're seeing that they're describing this guy from Ireland, 1739, and this is Ben Franklin. So 1739, we're still colonies. We're not even thinking about a revolution or anything yet. So pre-American Revolution. We're seeing this guy from Ireland's coming over, and we see a lot of language of faith, right? We're talking about preacher, we're seeing churches, clergy, pulpits, denominations, all sects and denominations, sermons, right? We're seeing a lot of that religious language. So that's probably something that we're going to be thinking about as we move through the questions. So when we get to question 1, Whitfield's impact suggests that religious culture among British North American colonists in the 1700s was most directly shaped by, and we know the answer is C. But before we even can think about that, there's some that we can cross off straight off the bat. For one, Roman Catholic influences, you may be tempted because of Ireland, but there's no explicit reference to Catholicism. We also should just know from our own context that we never really talked about Catholics. There's a lot of Protestantism, but we didn't really talk about Catholics too much. If anything, Catholics went to Maryland and were kind of discriminated against in other colonies. So it's probably not that. Interest in commerce and business, there's nothing about that in there. And reliance on agriculture. They do talk about being in fields, but they're talking about preaching in fields. So it wasn't this reliance on agriculture that shaped religion, but more of the transatlantic exchanges. And how we can think about that is we were still, at this time, still part of Great Britain. So we were getting so many things from Great Britain to the colonies that we were influenced through that Atlantic Ocean trade. Same thing when we see that this guy is coming over from Ireland. This Reverend Whitefield is exactly an exchange over the transatlantic. So C is our best answer. So we think about his open air preaching and what that could contribute. We get B. And why do we think that? For one thing, again, this is kind of the question. D is probably the answer that they want you to choose to try to trick you because you think, oh, religious movements, social reforms, they're often connected. This has got to be it. Quick answer, D. No. There's nothing about reform here. That's not what this is talking about. So they're trying to trick you with that. Don't fall for the trick. There is nothing about moving settlers to the backcountry. That's regardless of this. And the growth of the ideology of Republican motherhood, that really didn't come around until the American Revolution time anyway, so this is a little bit too early for that. And nothing about women in here, right? So that's irrelevant. We know that it's this because of this sentence. The multitudes of all sects and denominations that attended his sermon were enormous. Multitudes, sects, denominations. That means there was a lot of different people with a lot of different ideas. So that diversity of thought comes from many people all being able to listen to the same person, have conversations regardless of what their background is. So you get B. Okay, last one for this. We get D. Now, what is this excerpt, an example of the following developments? So we get to D because this is, right? This is exactly what this is describing. This idea of preaching, evangelizing, right? Evangelism means to talk about the gospel, talk about religion. And we already said up here, we know that American religion was often based in Protestantism, right? These different sects and denominations of the Christian or Protestant tradition. So that makes the most sense here. We know we're not calling for slavery yet. We're not talking about the Enlightenment yet. That comes a little bit later. And we're not even thinking about self-government yet, right? This is 1739. We're not even close to that yet. So D works the best. Okay. You guys recognize this? This was on a previous test. You might have also recognized throughout this multiple choice test that some of these feel a little bit familiar. That's because I've taken questions from here and put them on your test or your exams. So, a little bit late in the game, but showing my cards. This is how I got all my stuff. They're true AP questions. So you've had some practice with this. We're looking at the graph. We're seeing migration to the United States 1820 to 1860, excuse me. What should we be thinking about? 1820 to 1860. We know that 1861 was the start of the Civil War. And we also know 1820, we were getting a whole big market revolution and industrialization, right? So we're seeing that this chunk of time is probably at the start of when we are beginning a market revolution, beginning to industrialize, beginning to have different job opportunities, the creation of the Lowell factory system, right? All that stuff is happening in like this chunk of time. And then we're not even considering the Civil War yet, right? Because it hasn't started. So this is all of Unit 4, right? We look at this and we think about Unit 4. We think about Industrial Revolution, Technology Revolution, Communication Revolution, and we also think about the types of immigrants that came at that time, where we talked about briefly when we were reading from the textbook, when we were thinking about, oh, right, there was a certain type of immigrant that came at this time. So let's just say, number 4, which of the following was a significant cause of the trend from 1843 to 1854? So 43 is here, and then 54 is here. So we are looking at this, right? That is a big jump. So what could that be? We have active encouragement of migration by the U.S. government. Did we ever encourage active migration? No. We were nativists. We wanted people to stay American and don't come in here. So that is not it. We have, then let's get down to C. Incentives offered by the U.S. companies looking to hire skilled migrants. No, that isn't it either, right? And also, we weren't having any skilled laborers yet, right? We were just working in the factory system. That was where our jobs were at this point. So that's not it. And then adoption of free trade policy by European government. We're not talking about trade, we're talking about migration. So that's irrelevant. And then this one makes the most sense because these German and Irish immigrants were our population that were coming at this time. We can think back to the Irish famine, right? And then some of the political disruption in Germany at the time that were looking for them to leave. So those were the two first major groups of European immigrants to come to the United States. And this is all happening at that time, that first wave. So B is our best answer. Number 5, which of the following was a direct effect of the immigration, right? So we're looking at effect. We're thinking about effects, we're thinking about immigration. Even without looking at the answers, right? What could we be thinking about? If effect of immigration at this time, we can think about more employment for people, maybe. So that means that like the economy is really good because we're employing people are coming over. Maybe the rise of cities, right? Because like people are moving to the cities, maybe we can think about that. We also might be thinking of nativism and like the hatred of immigrants. So without even looking at the answers, we can think of some effects that might be fitting into this. And then we actually look. Definitely not an economic downturn, it's an upturn. Sectional tensions, that's not happening. That's happening for other reasons in 1820 to 1860 because of the debates over slavery, but that's not it. Oh, look, when we were just rattling off examples without even looking at these yet, we said nativism, right? Boom, C, easy. Not even going to take you a full minute, so you can use those extra seconds on something else. And then lastly, main trend shown in the graph, mostly associated with what? And we know industrialized economy for all the reasons that we've already talked about, right? We know at this time, Unit 4 is that first industrial revolution. We are becoming industrialized and moving away from agrarian society. This, just our own knowledge of Unit 4, not even looking at that graph, but just knowing what time period it is, can help us to answer that easily. Okay, shoot, I may end up having to do 2 of these. I'm going to move a little bit more quickly. So, number 7 is A. No, sorry, B. Hold on. I think that someone was calling me, but apparently it's fine. So, I'm doing this in Dr. Murray's office right now. And yeah, this is just like an awkward thing, but we're going to keep going. So, 7 is B as in boy. The idea, we can even just look at this, right? Seneca Falls Convention, Seneca Falls, we should immediately be thinking of Susan B. Anthony and this idea of, in that abolitionist movement, that there was also this first wave of that women should get the right to vote as well. And so we know, even without reading this, Seneca Falls, we're going to be talking about women getting more rights, getting the right to vote, having more autonomy. Now, it challenged the prevailing idea. Definitely not A. No one thought that, right? That was what they were trying to move to. It wasn't about wages right now either. And it's not talking about educating their children, right? That's kind of like the status quo. What it's challenging is this idea that women should focus on home and the domestic sphere and nothing else, right? That they should focus on their home, not think about politics, not think about voting, not thinking about having their own voice. B. Now, second half of the 19th century, right? So we are in 1850s into 1900. Which of these best represents? Where do we see women get most involved, right? Where were they acting and putting their voices out most? In these ideas of all these different organizations supporting different events and initiatives and different reform efforts through all of this idea of the progressive era, right? Now, you could think it might be the social gospel, thinking about settlement houses and all that, but women were involved in a lot of other things. So this A best encapsulates this idea of continuation of many different things. And then 9. This might be a little bit tricky. Which supporters of the Declaration broke ranks with which of the following supporters in the 1870s? Now, supporters of the 15th Amendment. We know that the 15th Amendment was the right for African Americans to vote. Because Seneca Falls was all about the right to vote for women, when it got into some entanglements with folks that were originally a part of the abolitionist movement, especially men who were part of the abolitionist movement, who were supporting freedom for slaves and were also supporting women's freedom, ultimately, this 15th Amendment idea was great for African Americans, but not great for women, because women were still being left out, which caused tension, right? If you both want the same thing, but only one of you, only part of your group is getting something, then you're going to break apart. So because this most directly relates to this idea of voting, we know that that is the correct answer, C. Okay. So this is a little blurry, but I guess you're all following on your pages. So you'll see here, right? Thomas Jefferson, Declaration of Independence. We should know this. 10 is A, 11 is D. We know that he wrote the Declaration of Independence in the attempt to, after Britain was trying to assert greater control over the North American colonies, right? It's not any of these other things. We should know that. Same thing here, right? Manifest Destiny doesn't come till later. Hereditary rights and privileges, we haven't talked about that. Principle of religious freedom, sure, but Enlightenment was this idea of democracy and this new political idea that was influencing our great thinkers of the time. D. Number 12, we're looking at Brown v. Board, right? So we know Brown versus Board of Education, even without looking at these questions. We're thinking Brown versus Board of Education, we're thinking Little Rock 9, we're thinking Ruby Bridges, we're thinking integration of schools, overturning of the idea of separate but equal. It's saying separate is not equal. So 12, most immediate result. We know this is about segregation, right? So we know segregationists in the southern states temporarily closed public schools to resist the decision. Think back to the excerpt from the movie that we watched, right? That's exactly what happened. They made the announcement, and then people protested, closed the schools, so this way they tried not to have it. That was like, we've already seen evidence of that. D. 13. Decision exerted most directly reflected a growing belief, blah, blah, blah. So what is this all about? What's the only thing that has anything to do with this whole topic? Racial justice. A. Brown v. Board reversed which of the earlier decisions? Now, we already know this. This is like in our vernacular, even when we talk about it, right? Separate but equal, no longer, we know, Plessy versus Ferguson. D. 15, D. 16, A. We just had this on our last test. See if you understand it. Shoot, I'm going to run out of time. So you know what? There will have to be a second video. Just hit pause.